you for hosting me.
Absolutely. So you were traveling a lot.
Yes,
Where are you
I am.
coming from?
I am actually this week. It's my US tour, so every day different city. Started with Austin, then moving to San Antonio, then San Jose, California. Then we went to Appleton, Wisconsin.
Yeah, you told me.
Oh my
It
God!
must have been a cold place.
It's not the weather that we Middle Eastern are used to.
I know, right? I remember working in Wisconsin. That was probably the coldest. I mean, the most, not coldest, the most unpredictable place I ever been to.
Well, we predicted it will be cold, and it was cold. Yes, and every event in every city we have these kind of events. We're meeting local manufacturers, and collaborating with the associations there, and presenting theory of constraints and knowledge and methodologies and what it can do for their business.
So, to our viewers, I guess the first thing let's do a little introduction about ourselves. Just introduce yourself.
So my name is Rami Goldratt. I'm the son of Dr. Eli Goldratt. That will be the last time I mention his name because typically in the Jewish culture we're not accustomed to call our parents by their names. It's considered disrespect. So the creator of the theory of constraints, he wrote this famous book, The Goal, that I assume a lot of your viewers read.
Absolutely.
And I'm leading his consulting arm. He's no longer with us. He passed away in 2011. But I'm leading his consulting arm for the last 15 years or so, of several hundred consultants worldwide.
Wow. Yeah, and we are here in Orlando, like Rami said, in the FloridaMakes studio. And FloridaMakes is a local MEP for the state of Florida. And myself, Pavel Kuviarzin, I represent Southwest Florida. So we actually have two manufacturing associations in Southwest Florida, which is SAMA and SRMA, SARMA. SAMA stands for Sarasota Manatee, and SARMA for Southwest Florida Manufacturing Association. And I have the privilege to have Rami over here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Having a little chat about theory of constraints, his work, and what is he up to. And actually, we're going to have a big event coming up to Southwest Florida where Rami is going to be presenting a seminar on February 21st. So
don't miss it.
Yeah, we are really excited. Don't miss it, absolutely. But we already have a lot of manufacturers sign up. It's going to be a big event, lots of people. We're already almost full capacity. So yeah, if you're hearing this podcast, I would really recommend you to sign up if there is seats available once you hear it. So yeah, you said theory of constraints, and I don't know if you know, but that's something that changed my life, personally.
Oh.
I don't know if you know that.
Please.
Yeah, so I started my career in distribution, and I was starting from the trenches, right? I was inventory control manager, I was returns department manager, I was procurement manager, operations manager, and I was managing about 550,000 square foot of distribution center. We were the largest HVAC plumbing distributor in Ontario, Canada.
Oh.
And I was managing the DC. And I was always thinking, how can I improve? What can I do? How can I connect all these concepts? And the one thing I was kind of missing is that everything we do is interconnected and interdependent. All the processes, you really need to focus on one thing to make improvements. And I was always hitting by this dilemma is that the policy in the organization was counterproductive to the organization and to what I was
quite often
to what I was doing, but I was always fighting this and I didn't have influence on that. And then I opened my consulting business and I started my first client. I thought I would be working with distributors, but my first client was a distributor and manufacturer, and that's how I was introduced to manufacturing. And then I partnered with a company in the States, and they were implementing theory of constraints. And that's when it clicked. Everything clicked. And the funny thing is that about your father, I learned about him first in academia. We had operations management course, and there was a little chapter about theory of constraint, and I was fascinated with it. And that's it. And then I did my project management professional designation, and there was a little chapter about theory of constraint. I was fascinated with it. Then I did my inventory management designation, and there was a little chapter about theory of constraint. I was fascinated with that, and eventually I partnered with a company There was doing theory of constraints, and then finally everything clicked. I'm like, aha.
It's quite amazing, we hear a lot about these stories. If I just, capture your last speak, you talked about your experience in university. So a lot of universities, theory of constraints is embedded in their curriculum, but it's just one small chapter among the many things that they teach.
Yep.
But nevertheless, when you speak with managers, they always remember it. They always say, okay, this small chapter that we had on theory of constraints for production or for supply chain or for project management, it fascinated me.
Yep.
I remember it. I remember reading the goal that the professor asked us to read. That's the only book we remember. But it's still a small chapter.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't know why is that. I think maybe they don't really know how to teach it.
It's a big question. I mean, because first I thought maybe because the professors either don't know about it or don't know how to teach it or are not so fascinated about it. Maybe it's more like for real practical life, less for academia, less studies done. But honestly, in my tours, I quite a lot of times I'm coming and lecturing in universities, giving a lecture.
Yep.
And speaking with the professors. And they all know about it and they love it. They also know the book, the goal, and they love teaching it, and it makes perfect sense. They also see that the students are fascinated with it.
Yep.
So it's not because of lack of motivations of the professors. So I don't know, it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
It is a mystery, but
maybe there are some measurements that the professors are measured that is counter TOC, I don't know.
It is actually, it's funny you said it because it is counter TOC. So I worked with a technical college in Tampa area, not Tampa, but I can't remember the actual, but it's close to Tampa. And they were telling me that they're being measured on how many students they graduate in their program. So guess what they were doing to make sure more students graduate?
Yeah.
Simplifying the curriculum.
Of course. Of course. So it's either this measurement or the measurement for publications, or I don't know. It's just what it is. But if I, you spoke about your experience in distribution centers.
The book, the books that I would recommend anybody to read for
Yes.
distribution centers, Isn't It Obvious? That's the
About inventories.
And I remember your father Eli was saying that distribution was his dilemma for a long time. I watched the video, and he didn't know how to fix it, but then he realized, aha, it's actually the easiest one to fix.
So isn't it obvious, which speak about more about inventory management?
Yeah.
So for distribution operation, there are two types. There is one that also can control what the inventory levels in the warehouse.
Yep.
Which means that you can also have the function that order to the warehouse and dispatching from the warehouse. But there's also many times in distribution operations that this is not under the responsibility. The responsibility is not the inventory, but the operation, the picking, the shipping.
Yep. That's so true.
And also there are a lot of constraints. The business people that really understands inventory turns are resellers. Because that's their business, right? To rotate inventory. They buy, they sell. Every time they rotate, when they buy and sell, they make their profit. That's the margin that comes in. So they really understand inventory turns. But outside resellers, if you talk to manufacturers, if you talk to operations people in warehouse, that's not their main measurement. Most of their cash is not tied up in inventory. So why should they measure inventory turns? But for resellers, it is.
But they're losing such a big competitive advantage by having inventory turns. You want to talk a little about the competitive advantage?
Constraints competitive advantage, first of all, starts obviously from the customer that you're serving, and from the value you provide to the customer. So it's not so much about being better than the competitors, which is competitive advantage, simply. It's really about being able to deliver superior value to the customer. And how is this tied up to inventory? If you are a reseller, then the value you're supposed to provide to the customer is availability of the right products. So it's that the customer wants to buy, of course, at the right price. So it's all about how do you make sure you have the right product, which the customer wants to buy at the right price, at the right place, at the right time. And the challenge is that to have the right product at the right place at the right time, you need to use forecasts, because we still don't have these 3D printers that can print a product in front of the customer when it comes to buy.
At any time, right?
And my father had a very famous saying about forecasts. He said, "Forecast is wrong the moment you write it."
I love that. I gotta start using that.
Forecast is wrong the moment you write it. So we do our best, of course, to have the best forecast we can. We have IT algorithms, we have big data lakes, etc. I speak with a lot of managers worldwide. Nobody tells me that the forecast is getting easier. It's just not. And if you really try to understand why the forecasts are not getting more accurate, it's because of three dynamics that are happening worldwide across industries. And it's not just an academic understanding. Once you understand these dynamics that deteriorate the accuracy of the forecast, you will understand that you need to build your operations differently to have a competitive edge. Mm-hmm. It's not about having better forecasts, but it's about reacting much faster to reality as it unfolds, because forecasts are not accurate. And the three dynamics that I mentioned, if you want, I will share.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't know what your viewers are interested in. So each one of them has to do with the interaction between consumers' behavior and the reaction of companies like retailers, wholesalers to this behavior. So the first behavior is something we call consumers' personalization. Consumers are becoming more sensitive to get a product that fits their individual preferences. You agree?
Yeah.
Okay, they wanted a product that fits their specific tastes, for example, or needs. Now, consumers have the individual preferences of consumers is not uniform.
No.
Which means that if consumers are more picky, more choosy, and their preferences are not uniform, this puts pressure on resellers to offer more choices, to increase the variety of their offerings.
No, makes sense.
To hold more products in stock, basically. Now, when you expand, and you can check, there are like a lot of available statistics. Any industry, if you check in the last 20 years, 30 years, the range of products that is being offered, you will see an exponential growth, right? Mm-hmm. Think about yourself as a child going to a grocery to buy, I don't know, a yogurt. Yeah. How many yogurts you've seen 30 years ago and how many yogurts you see today?
Probably more. Yeah.
Probably
many more.
Yeah. Even yogurts, even bread, basic products. And of course, when we talk about fashion, clothes, apparel, it's going up. Electronics. Now, the problem is that when you increase the range of products, the ability to have accurate forecasts reduces dramatically. Mm-hmm. Because when there's like a unwritten law that says the more range, the higher the range, the wider the range you're holding, the more slow movers you will have.
Yep.
Unavoidable.
I gotta. Sorry, I don't want to.
Nah, sure.
But I gotta throw in a quote by Taichi Ono, and that's actually standing on the shoulders of giants. Like the early, like one really worthwhile article to read, or it's like 3 pages. But anyway, Taichi Ono once said, "The more inventory you have, the less likely the probabilities that you're gonna have what your customers need."
Exactly. Exactly. So when you increase the range, there is this point that the choices you're adding are actually slow-moving products. There are products that have less demand for. And the challenge is that this doesn't only cost you money, because now your budget is tied up with the slow-moving products and it's not available to buy what you can sell. Or your space is stuck with these slow-moving products and you cannot have space to offer what you say. So the damage of slow-moving products is not just on cost, it's on sales as well.
Of course.
Now we cannot use forecasts to know how many different products we need to have in each category. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And therefore, usually what you see is resellers swing between having too wide and too narrow range of products. It just depends on the extreme side that they're in. If you have too wide, it's just, then the slow movers are just building up until they have no choice but to cut the range, and then they move to too narrow range and all of that. And you cannot use forecasts. The only way to have accurate range is to have the ability to read very quickly in every point of sale location.
Yep.
Like if you have too little, too narrow, to read the signals, you need, of course, to understand what are the signals. That tells you if you have too wide or too narrow range, and to react very quickly. And that's just the first dynamic, right?
I know, you said 3, right?
The second one we call consumer tolerance time. So how long consumers are willing to wait to have the product available.
Not long.
Not long, right? Their patience is reducing. They're less willing to wait or willing to wait much less. And because of that, we have pressure, of course, to hold more inventories. Not just to hold more inventories, but to spread them to more locations so they are held closer to consumers.
Yep.
Okay, we cannot have just one warehouse to service all the nation or even all of Florida. We start have regional warehouses, stores. We need to keep it close to consumers. Because when the tolerance time equals 0, it means that if you don't have the product in front of the customer when he came to buy, you lost the sale.
Yep.
Now, of course, when I need to hold more inventory up front and when I need to spread it in many, many different locations, the accuracy of the forecast reduces.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can aggregate it in one place, the statistical fluctuations will average out. So again, now we have a challenge, how much inventory I should hold from each product. And it happens in parallel to the range problem.
Yeah.
I need more SKUs and on each one, how many to hold. And you cannot use forecasts. You just need to read very quickly. If you have too much, too less, you need to understand what it means and to react by improving your flow of operations. The third dynamic is actually even worse if you look at the damage it has on forecast accuracy. We call it product life cycle. So how long products are available in the marketplace before a substitute is introduced.
Yeah.
Okay, now I will ask you for different products that you can think of. What do you think happened to product life cycle? Is it getting longer or shorter?
Shorter.
Much shorter, right?
Reminds me of a book, Critical Chain. Right? They have a problem there.
Now correct. Now, if the product life cycle is getting shorter, this puts pressure on companies to increase the frequency of new product introductions because customers expect newness.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you attract them to the store. As we increase the frequency, introduce new products more often, actually we are reducing the product life cycle even more. It's like a loop.
It's a vicious cycle.
Correct. And now new products, you have zero history of consumption to learn from. You don't know how much.
No idea.
And most new products are not the next Harry Potter book.
No, it's not.
You don't know that it will be a superstar. You have no idea. And if it's a superstar, it will disrupt all the rate of consumption of all the other products in this that are relevant, right? So of course it deteriorates the accuracy of the forecast. And again, it's not about forecasting, it's about reading and reacting very fast. And that's what fear of constraint brings to the table.
Yep.
To build an operational system that reacts very, very quickly, that reduces the lead times, instead of relying on forecasts. So, long answer to a short comment.
It's almost reducing the management window, if you will, to react.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. One of the biggest factors that elongates the lead time is management reaction, is management attention. The decision to place an order for a product, for example.
No, makes sense.
Yeah, that's why you mentioned back to the story about warehouses that you start. One of the biggest problems in warehouses is the batching policy.
Yep.
Right? We're trying to improve productivity, so we want to work with larger batches of shipment, of ordering, of storing, of picking. But the larger is the batch, the longer it takes you to react. Right? And then you end up with slow moving and high moving and shortages, It all goes haywire.
Yeah, and in my story, actually, it was the erroneous policies that was driving the company in the wrong direction. One of the limitations, I think, from Eli, right, is if you have erroneous policy in your organization. And sometimes, we were doing it for 50 years. So an example in erroneous policy in this specific situation is they had a policy that they have different profit centers, right? So they have the distribution center, which is supplying maybe, I think it was like 50 or 60 different branches. And those branches in different regions, they had also a warehouse. So the distribution center goes to a warehouse, and the warehouse supplying more branches. And the policy was that you have cost centers, and you are profitable as your cost center is, and then you have inventory. The distribution center was never profitable, ever. And then they decided, we'll charge our branches more per line item on a warehouse transfer. So we'll charge them more. That's the same company, but we're charging the branches. So we're increasing the cost of the line. What's the branches doing? They're increasing the batch size. Instead of ordering 2 pieces that they need for a month, they'll order 100 pieces, correct? So now we have, and then what the distribution center does, the purchasing and distribution center, we have more demand. But it's the branches that they demand. And they're ordering more, so they're filling the distribution center. And then everybody's sitting on a lot of inventory. And everybody's happy.
Exactly.
It's unbelievable. And then the parent organization, so they were purchased, they paying them an inventory fee based on how much inventories they have. So the parent organization is also happy because the more inventories they have, the more money they make in the parent organization.
Talk about distorted measurements, right?
And then the distribution center, for the first time ever, is making money.
So that's
Because
we
they're
saw
charging the
it
branches.
very often.
It's unbelievable.
Local measurements or local optimize, my father used to
Yes.
call it, does not translate to global optimum, right? Absolutely. You remind me another saying that my father had. He said, until the end consumer bought the product, nobody actually sold.
Exactly.
Because we see these local measurements of internal transfers prices, right? And it's like, you think that, okay, if I will make each link of the chain more profitable by these measurements, then everything will be more profitable. But it doesn't work like that in the throughput world.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. And the company never actually made more money. They were kind of flat.
We see the same thing in flow of manufacturing, right? If you try to make every department or workstation as efficient as possible, as productive as possible, you will motivate them actually to work with larger batches to reduce the setups.
So I gotta ask
And you end up with a lot of inventories everywhere.
I gotta ask you something about manufacturing. And
Please.
I work with different companies, right? Different industries. But I noticed there is this one thing that is always, not always, but in many companies I noticed before starting working with them, and at times the decision already was made, and I'm telling you, why did you make this decision? But they looking at the first process upstream, the very first process after raw material, and that's what they invest. In theory of constraints, there is five focusing steps, and they go right away for elevate. And elevate, you're not ready to elevate. You're not even stable yet. You didn't even identify anything. But they go to elevate, and I know you're going to talk about the focusing steps project, so I'm going to let you talk about it. But the funny thing is, I notice it's so often that manufacturers decide to invest a lot of money upstream. And I was thinking, why? And then the idea is, I guess the common sense tells me they decide to invest upstream in the very first process because they think if I make more upstream, I will definitely sell more. And it's so wrong because all you're going to do, you're going to create more work in process inventory. So you're going to have more inventory between the stations. You're not going to sell more. You're just going to create even more disruptions in your processes.
So we also, it's quite common that we see that the upstream workstations have more capacity.
Yeah.
We call it protective capacity or access capacity versus the rest of the operation because of what you just said. And part of the methodology of theory of constraints, maybe we'll get to it in a moment, is in order to improve flow, the first thing you do, if your work is filled with inventories everywhere, is to choke the release of inventory. So actually to release work later, and everything will be done much faster. Because when everything is clogged with WIP and inventories, lead times go through the roof.
Exactly. The more work in process, the more lead time.
Now, if your first station is not the cost constraint, the bottleneck, it has excess capacity, and you are now choking the release of work into the floor, it means that immediately they will, from time to time, they will be idle.
And people get paranoid.
Exactly, right? They get paranoid for the right reasons. Okay, what's going on? Are we out of business? We don't have demand? Am I going to be fired? So part of implementing theory of constraints is to address these concerns, to explain to people that we are making a paradigm shift here, a mindset, different mindset. It's not about how productive you are, or your productivity is not measured by how busy you are, but in a different way. How fast you do the work when you have work.
Exactly.
Okay, so, and the real productivity, to have enough work, this should be measured for the entire process, not per station.
Exactly. I'm going to tell you a story when you
Please.
So we worked with a manufacturer. So February we started the project, and when we go on the plant floor, I couldn't even see all the stations because they were buried in WIP, in work in process inventory, and then you have to go around those what's it called, tubs. It's like a metal crate. They call it tubs, and they're stuck on top of each other, like 5, sometimes even more, 8 of them on top of each other, like very high. You go around them and you're like, oh, that's the workstation, that's the machining, right? That's the machining workstation. Like, wow, you have a lot, and they were sitting on, I think, about 15, 16 weeks of lead time. And the first thing we did when we started implementing, we choked the release. They were crazy, like, no, you cannot, what are you doing? We're gonna, no. I'm like, you release so much work, you definitely can fulfill the orders you currently have with all the work in process. So what we did, we choked the release for 2 weeks. They didn't like it, but we cleaned up all the work in process. We released what we could for the work for the sales orders. And then we put stickers, like just little stickers, on every work order, and we prioritize them by color. So we have blue, we had green, we had yellow, we had red, and we had black. So black means that's the first one to prioritize because
it's already late.
we like not late. We are super late. Then you have red, that's the one you work on first. Then you have yellow, that's kind of normal. The yellow, green is normal. Then you have blue, you don't touch, it's frozen. So the funny thing, a year later, we still had blue stickers. So they released so much work, and they didn't even need it. But it was a major success, and then we finally identified the constraint. The constraint was the heat treatment operation.
Not surprising.
And it was the robots. They had like 5 robots in this heat treatment operation, and guess what? It was during COVID. 1 robot we had to send to Germany because there was some issue, so we only had 4 robots. So we were already losing 20% capacity right there out in anything constraint. And then we created a protective buffer in front of the constraint, so the constraint is never starved. And we were able to improve the throughput so much on the constraint that they never been able to produce as much we produced with 4 robots. With 5 robots before, and it's a constraint, and that's how much we ship out of the door. And then a 5th robot came in, and we were just blowing everybody. It's a competition, you name it. But before that, they actually had an erroneous policy, like you said. They had local optima. So the departments were incentivized to produce more. So they had, starting from forge, then machining, then you have heat treatment. And they were incentivized how much forge gonna do, how much machining gonna do, how much heat treatment gonna do, how much final assembly gonna do, not related to each other. So they were focusing on the easy stuff, and they were batching.
Correct.
So the first thing we did, we changed the policy. It was like, no, you get incentivized based on how much you ship, and we're gonna reduce the batch 50%.
So what you're telling us is it's actually something we see a lot, obviously, in manufacturers. But maybe for our viewers, we'll put some order in this story. So the most fundamental process of theory of constraints is called the 5 focusing steps. And it starts with understanding, identify your constraint. What is the one thing that really is holding you back to achieve more of your goal? So, by the way, there is like an assumption that your goal is very clear, and goal units, which what we call throughput. So how you can, what is it? Goal units, basically throughput means that if you achieve more of them, you achieve more of your goal. Okay? So, for example, if you define your goal in terms of profit, then throughput will be your sales minus your raw material cost, etc. And then later you do throughput minus operating expense, the fixed ones, and you get to profit. Now, it's not always in money terms.
Right?
But anyway, after you identify the constraint, the one thing that holds you back to get more throughput, more goal units, and it's not an easy. steps. Sometimes we go to companies and we ask them what is their constraints. They will not immediately tell you the heat treatment. They will tell you, depends which day of the week you come.
That's right.
It seems that constraint is moving, and it's moving because of policies again, like large batches. So it's like a snake that is swallowing a cow, right? As the batch moves through the system, that's where your constraint will be. So you first identify the constraint. Usually, it's not easy, but usually what we're really looking for is to see where are the longest waiting times, the highest pile of WIP that is typically accumulating. Sometimes you can use calculations of capacity to see where it should be. Sometimes when we really don't know, we just, as you said, we choke the release of WIP and we see then where it accumulates. Okay. Now, after you identify the constraint, the second step will be to decide how to exploit it. So how do you get the maximum from your constraint? As with things like you mentioned, for example, let's make sure there is also always buffer of work in front of the constraint, so it never starves. So all the departments before the constraint, including the release of material, should be aligned in order to release work, and to do the work that is needed to have the buffer in front of the constraint. Now, of course, you don't want too much buffer or you don't want too little buffer. So there is a whole considerations. We're not going to go.
We usually do like 20%.
There are rules of thumb, but it depends on things. We're not going to go into it now. So, but having a buffer in front of the constraint is one tactic. Another tactic is also to look at the times where your constraint is idle. Not because there is shortage of work in front of it, but for other reasons. Like, I remember this plant that the constraint was idle 1 hour a day because of whenever there was a shift change, it took time for the workers on these machines, right? They need to go to their lockers to change their uniforms, go to their buses, and until the next shift arrives. So whenever there was a shift change, there was like half an hour of idle machine, which is the constraint.
That's a problem.
It's a problem, right? So there could be other reasons why it's idle. Maybe because of maintenance, breakdown. So another thing you need to make sure, right? If I identify a certain department or workstation as a constraint, where should I have my quality control? Right? Of course, you need the quality control also at the end before you ship it to a customer. But you also would like to make sure that if you can identify products before they go into your constraints to make sure that they are not affected.
That would be good, right?
I think it will be good, right? So whenever we see a bottleneck that works on rework, we tell the shop floor people, we tell them, guys, this is a crime. Your constraint is working twice on the same product, and how can you allow such a thing? So you want to make sure that you exploit the constraint. By the way, another thing that is important in this regard is to make sure it works on the right products. Because, for example, maybe in order to improve some batching in previous workstations, they produce in larger batch more than what the order.
Something the customer doesn't need
now. They said, okay, eventually we will sell it. And now the constraint is going to work on this large batch because it arrived to him. For the same reason, it's of course...
That's the just-in-case mentality.
Exactly. It's to improve the productivity, the local efficiency.
The local optima,
right?
Absolutely.
Or you don't work on the products that give you the highest throughput for every moment of your constraint, for the capacity of your constraint. So after you exploit the constraint, or decide how to exploit, then comes the most difficult step. And we call it subordinate everything else to the above decision. So identify the constraints, decide how to exploit it, and then subordinate everything else to the above decision, which basically means making sure that the local measurements, the local efficiencies, all of that will not stand in your way to get the maximum from your constraint. And this is often the most difficult step to do. Most difficult step. I'll give you an example that is not actually within the production line.
Sure.
Just to highlight to what extent subordinate is not easy. So this company was it's a very large prefabricated home builders.
Okay.
Prefabricated home builder basically means that, of course, you sit with the customer, you design his home, and then you produce the modules in your production site and you assemble it on site. In this case, the design department of this company was the constraint. It was a huge backlog of design orders. Customers were not willing, were not willing to wait, things like that.
So it's more like a project management environment, right?
The design department itself is a product, but of course, if you ask the company, are you project manufacturing? They have a lot of big plans to make all the modules. Now, if the design department is like your bottleneck, and you mentioned it's a project environment, a design department, there are certain things you need to do. Maybe we'll come back to talk about it. But one of the things was we really need to make sure that the salespeople are providing orders to the design department that have, we call it full kit.
Yep.
That where all the information, all the authorizations by the customer, everything is ready. So once the design department start to work on this order, they can complete it. It's going to be done in the right way. Now, a lot of the orders that the design department was working on did not have full kit.
Yep.
And which immediately resulted in very high levels of rework. So now we need to sit with the salespeople and tell them, guys, in order for you to sell more, or for the company to sell more at the end of the day, because the design department is a bottleneck, okay, we are now going to set a discipline of full kit, which basically means that if orders that do not have the full kit, whatever specifications that are needed, authorizations, information, the design department will not work on it, regardless when it came in. It's no longer FIFO for the design department.
Yeah.
No full kit, no work. Make sure the kit is full. This is called subordinating.
I like that. Yeah.
This is called subordinating. It was not easy to agree with the sales department because they said, okay, just start working on it. I lose the customer.
Yeah.
And we're trying to tell them and show them that they're losing more customers by having so much volume of work that is not fully kitted. Because customers are not willing to wait for such a long time because of all this rework, etc. So
you're forcing it.
My father was very picky on every word he used. He said subordinate. He didn't use align, synchronize, no, subordinate.
It's a strong word.
Strong, right? Because why do you need force? Because you need to counter the local measurement force.
Yep. No, it makes sense. And it's almost like from your example, what they were doing is a lot of multitasking before the
we'll get to it. Correct. Well, that's another. There are certain constraints in project work environments that are slowing down the flow. I think we should get to it. Let me just complete the 5 focusing steps for our.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And you can talk a little bit about the book as well.
Yes.
The latest book.
Yes, I will. So identify the constraint.
Yep.
Decide how to exploit it. Subordinate everything else to the above decision. And now comes elevate the constraint.
Yep.
Which is now is the time to invest in order to get more capacity or constraint. And you rightfully said that many times we make the mistake of jumping to elevate.
Yep.
Okay?
Absolutely. It happens time and time.
I mean, just think about if people struggle to get things out of the door fast enough, the first thing they will request is more resources.
Yeah, we need more money, we need more resources, we need more something.
This is elevate. Now, we always try to tell people, managers, we say, look, if it was easy to add more resources, you would have done it. You wouldn't have reached this problem. So probably adding more resources is not easy.
Yeah.
Either because the resources that are needed are scarce for some reason, or because they are too expensive, or because of cost-effective consideration. Whatever is the reason, adding more resources is not easy, because if it was simple, you would have done it. So before we jump to the conclusion that we need more resources, let's see if we can exploit, if we can get much more from the structure that we have, from the system we have.
Yeah.
When you are asking for more resources, it means that you assume that you're already as the best you can in using your current resources. And that's a very strong assumption to make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now after you do the right exploitation, if you know how to move more, improve the flow with your current resources, then you may still need to add resources. That's elevate.
Yeah.
But because you improve the efficiency, the real productivity of your current resources, then you may not need as many resources as you thought you need before, and then you can actually invest in getting them. So this is the elevate step. And the last step, the fifth one, so identify, exploit, subordinate, elevate. The fifth step is a warning. Beware of inertia. Beware of inertia. The constraint can move. Now, we call it a warning because sometimes you want to take actions to prevent something from becoming a constraint. So it's not always you just wait for the constraint to move and then, okay, beware, the constraint move, you need to repeat the entire process. Sometimes you need to be aware of it before it moves. What is your future constraints? Because whenever the constraint moves, it means you need to realign the entire system. It's not something that companies would like to do. And what you really also need to be careful is that there is something we call internal and external constraint. Internal constraint means you have a bottleneck somewhere in your own operations. External constraint means that your market now is limiting you from achieving more of your goal. You don't have enough demand, basically. You can produce more than what the market wants. And then, in order to break this constraint, you need to work on your offering, right? Maybe think if you can produce faster, will you get more demand or more reliable or produce different products or change your business model. You need to work, my father used to call it, you need to create a mafia offer. What is a mafia offer? An offer that the customers cannot refuse. He was not referring to a head of a horse in your bed, but, but to other things, but yeah. So that's the 5 focus steps. And that's the framework we always use regardless of the company environment. It could be resellers, it could be manufacturing, it could be project-based companies. Yes.
Absolutely.
First, let's talk about the constraint inside the production. It's true you need to strategic, and it depends on several factors. Also, for example, how easy it is to increase capacity of your different machines, etc., which can be very different. But like in general rule, you need to understand that if you have your constraint, if you position it at the early stages, it means that by definition you will choke the release of work because it's at the beginning, and that's good because you have less whip and everything will flow after the constraint. If it's easy to plan because it's right there at the beginning. But on the other hand, if you position it towards the end, maybe you'll achieve actually better control because you can see if there are no problems elsewhere. But this is like different considerations that are very case dependent.
Depending on the environment.
Correct. And depends on the environment exactly. Sometimes you want to hold things as we call it like kits. Not fully assemble all the products, but assemble it to order, and then it means that you want it later. And also, if you talk strategically, you need to decide if you want your constraint to be internal or external. Like, do you want the constraint to be inside your operations so you can control it more? Or you want the constraint to be in the market? Because if it's inside, it means that you're not fulfilling, by definition, you're not fulfilling all demand you have, all the demand.
And I think Eli was saying that he would like to move the constraint to the market, right?
So
or maybe I misunderstood.
The real, and this goes back to what we call competitive edge. Okay? The ideal state you will be is to actually have your constraint inside, but only when you have a competitive edge. So you can really be selective on which orders you want to fulfill, which customers you want to sell to. So like having it internal, but being able to choose because you have a competitive edge. Okay, that's like ideal. In situation.
How many companies did you see in this situation?
We're helping companies to achieve it. That's exactly the point. We think that you should be always in a position that you can choose your customers. That's always better. One of the subjects we briefly touched, maybe we go back to it.
Sure.
I mentioned a new book that it was released a year ago.
Yeah.
It's called Goldratt's Rules of Flow, written by my sister.
Yeah. And actually, before you continue, but I was reading this book, and a great book, but it's actually the second part. And in the beginning, Dr. Efrat,
You can call her Efrat. That's fine.
Efrat?
She doesn't like to be
Okay.
called Doctor.
Okay, Efrat was mentioning something that Eli was thinking to release this book for a long time, and she was saying that now it's the right time. And I was thinking, and she was also saying that it's the second part of a book, but I didn't realize which book is she referring to until I started reading the book. I'm like, oh, so it's the second part of Critical Chain, because Professor Silver is there, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
you can go ahead.
So both books deal with project environment.
Yeah.
So first, just to understand what is the difference between projects and production. So one main difference is that in production, work is much more repetitive, much more standard
Yeah.
than in project environment, which basically means that in project environment you have higher levels of uncertainties. You're doing work not such a patterned way. And the other issues with projects that many times it involves high level of synchronization.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you need to synchronize a lot of resources and activities as part of your project in order to get things on time. And the third difference is, we call it the ratio between touch time and lead time. So touch time is the actual time you are doing the work. In production, the ratio is very low, right? To make one piece can take you a minute, but the lead time could be 3 weeks to get the order. Okay, so the ratio between touch time and lead time is typically it will be not more than 10%.
Mm-hmm.
In project is not the case. Okay, the touch time has a much higher share from the lead time.
Yeah.
Which basically means that you are much more, you have much less buffer to meet the deadlines. Now, critical chain talks about all the subject of planning. How do you plan the project in the right way to get the projects done on time?
Mm-hmm.
And we can go back to it later, because I want to. What we saw though, that if you just deal with the planning, you will have a problem, because you're not fixing the common constraints or obstacles to flow in your project work.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, you can do the best planning you want, but then you immediately will see that you're not going to deliver on time, because you're not fixing the execution problem.
Yeah.
And I don't want to create just longer plans or plan the projects with longer durations because I didn't fix the execution problem. So let's first fix the execution problem, and that's what obstacles to flow is all about.
Mm.
And that's what Goldratt Rules of Flow book is describing.
And I think she had how many rules?
She has about 7 rules.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes, 7. And so there are different obstacles, if you wish, like constraints in project work that we need to address to get more projects done faster. The first one that is very intuitive to understand is, we call it bad multitasking.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, bad multitasking is when you are forced to switch from one task to another without completing any of the tasks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, we're not saying that any multitasking is bad. That's why we call it bad multitasking.
Yeah.
Okay?
I like how you specify.
Exactly. We expect people to be able to work on more than one thing. But that multitasking, when you go into this spiral of switching back and forth between tasks without completing them, every task will take much, much longer to complete.
Yep.
And because the work is complicated, it's not repetitive. When you go back and forth, you will have a lot of quality issues.
We're just about to ask you about what about quality.
Exactly.
But, yeah, just mention it.
And people underestimate the damage that bad multitasking has on lead times and productivity.
Yep.
It's not that it has makes it longer by 10%. It makes it longer by 4 times, 5 times, 10 times longer.
Yep.
Which results in a lot of delays. Not to talk about the durations that are increasing because of the rework that is done because of the quality issues. And we need to understand that bad multitasking will happen the moment you have a lot of open jobs in front of you.
Yeah.
You cannot avoid it. If you have what is open job? It's a job that if you can work on it. If you want, you can work on it. It's open for you to work.
Yeah.
Okay? When you have a lot of open jobs in front of you, you will go into bad multitasking. Priorities will change. Something will become urgent. Your boss will call you and tell you to do something else. Clients will come and say, we want it differently, so you need to start immediately redo something you thought is complete and you already done. You start something, something is missing, like inputs, then you switch.
Yeah.
It happens. And the best way, therefore, to control bad multitasking is simply to limit the open work. Similar to what we talked about in production.
Yeah.
Interesting. If you want everything to be done faster, start it later.
Yep.
Isn't it interesting? Because when you try to start everything as early as possible, everything will be late. Now, how to limit the working in the open work, when to release it, and all of that, there are certain rules about it. You can read the book.
Yeah.
I recommend.
recommend to read it, yeah.
And this is just the first obstacle. If you're interested, I can share. I don't know if it's...
No, absolutely. I mean,
I'll share two more because I don't want to go into...
But it relates to production if you really think about it.
Yes.
Multitasking happens in production, and if you really think about production, it's so similar to project environment.
Correct.
Right?
In this regard.
Yeah.
The concepts are the same, not the application.
I mean, production has a lot of issues with synchronization problems. That's actually one of the major issues I see is synchronizing. You have different value streams, you need to meet a certain point, and it's really hard to synchronize the problem.
So, in production and in projects, on the concept level, to achieve better synchronization, you need to apply the same thing, which is you need to identify one thing that will be constant, that will not change.
Yeah.
We call it the drum.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so in production it will be the constraint, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So in project it's more elusive, but you need to find something that will be considered a drum. If in your project environment you have a bottleneck, you have a scarce resource, the schedule of this resource will be the drum, or it could be the schedule at the integration point.
Yeah.
Or it could be, sometimes we define, like in complicated engineering or R&D environments, we define the drum as the capacity to make decisions. Mm-hmm. How many projects you can have running in parallel in order to be able to use it. And the drum serves to do two things. First, to limit the open work.
Yeah.
Again, because when you limit the open work, you will have better synchronization. And the second thing, of course, is to schedule the activities. Okay, to schedule the activities, which task I need to do next, based on the priorities, which are based on the scheduling of your drum. Again, I will not go into all the technicalities. And it's the same in production and in project environment in this regard. Mm-hmm. The next obstacle to flow, which is also common for both, we call it full kit. I mentioned it when we spoke about the design department and the sales department, which basically, when you see that a lot of the tasks in your projects are on hold, because something is missing, or needs to be redone, rework, because you have done it without the right information, which means the information was missing at the time. Then you need to put in place this full kit discipline.
Yep. And it's very common in production too. I mean,
correct.
You need the full kit.
In production, actually, it's very intuitive. People already understand. You don't release if you don't have all the home, etc.
But if you don't...
In project environment, where the damage of lack of full kit is much worse, it's not so intuitive.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is information, authorizations.
I agree. In production, I guess it's intuitive, but for some reason... I see time and time again when work is being released without full kit. Yeah. For example, I work with the manufacturers. They do actually mattresses, right? And their constraint is the glue, but they don't have the right material. So the glue operators, what we call them, is the surgeon concept. The surgeon is not going to start looking for material. Not going to start looking for tools to complete the job. Actually, they have 10 people around them. They're giving them the tools, right? So in this environment, they do mattresses, but the glue is a point of synchronization, and they don't have full kit.
Yeah.
So you have the glue, the high valuable skilled resource is looking for stuff.
Exactly.
And as soon as we said, okay, no, these guys they need a full kit before we even start gluing, and we were able to increase the capacity 50% right away.
We had the same. I heard yesterday. I was one of the projects we have done with a company that make electric cabinets.
Okay.
Okay, so it's like a cabinet from certain metal, and all the wires and the switches, etc., goes into it, and they make it. They have big ones for complicated projects like buildings and small ones. And of course, it's basically, remember we said it's like an A, right? At the end you have this assembly.
Yeah.
And the assembly was working many times on incomplete kits.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a lot of, we start to work on a cabinet, but something is missing.
So you go with the different.
So we define the full kit there, right? Like you don't work, and we define the role, which is full kit manager.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to be responsible to make sure that there are enough full kits in front of assembly before they start to work. So yeah.
Absolutely, and actually that's what we did with the mattress manufacturer. We know we have capacity everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
so we have extra capacity, excess capacity. So we just found people to, like you said, full kit manager.
Exactly.
Yes, full kit manager. We just called them. We didn't call them full kit manager, but we called them like a stager or something like that. It's the same concept.
The interesting thing about full kit also is tying up to the next obstacle to flow, which we call standardization. So there are certain environments where work is not standard by definition.
Yeah.
Like R&D, like service companies that every customer have their own particular requirements, like engineering, like IT companies. Many times work is not standard, very diverse, which means that the same work can be done in multiple ways.
Yep.
Now, in such environments, to do the job right, eventually you depend on experts in your operation. The people that have accumulated enough experience
Mm-hmm.
to use their judgment to get the job done right, like the top IT people or engineers or top consultants in our profession.
Yeah.
Now, what happened in environments where these organizations scale? Suddenly, you introduce a lot of this non-standard work into the system, right?
Yeah.
All of it falls on the shoulders of your experts, basically. They become immediately a bottleneck.
Yeah, makes sense.
How do you know? You see a lot of backlog in front of them, and you see them going immediately into bad multitasking, hectic bad multitasking. The same thing, by the way, can happen when instead of growing, you're actually losing people. Same thing. If you lose a lot of people for whatever reason, then again, the experts that remain in your operations suddenly are facing a lot of work on their shoulders.
Very busy.
Now, they are very busy, the backlog is growing, they are into bad multitasking, which further increases the backlog, right? Because bad multitasking is making everything takes longer. Now, work cannot wait for the experts to be available. So who will do the job?
The new guys.
The less experienced people, right? Now, what will happen then?
Quality.
Of course, you have a lot of mistakes in your work. Who needs to fix the mistake?
The experts.
The experts. Now they're even more busy.
It's a vicious cycle again.
Correct. By the way, they also need to train the new guys.
Yep.
Now, it's totally vicious cycle. Now, how do we know it's such a big problem? Usually when we go to these environments, they tell us, well, we have to standardize. We really need the protocols, the standard operating procedures, the manuals. Nobody likes to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But who needs to write it?
The experts.
Right? And more than that, even if they attempt to write it, because the work is so diverse, the manual will not possibly cover a lot of cases, some of which you don't even know you're going to face.
Yeah.
So they end up putting a lot of time trying to write it, and nevertheless, still, for many cases, the manuals are not applicable. So still, again, you have a lot of mistakes. You're in this endless vicious cycle.
Yep. So what do?
First, you need to identify the constraint.
Yep.
What is the constraint?
The experts.
The experts. Then we need to be a little bit more sophisticated. It's not just the experts. You want to identify what is this expertise, this work that requires judgment, that only the experts should do. That if it's done by less experienced workers, most likely you have mistakes. Once you define it, for example, I'll give you a simple case. Maybe the experts are welders because of sophisticated.
That's actually very true in many situations.
But it doesn't mean that any welding requires their expertise. Okay, so it's not just to say the welders. say welders of welding these type of orders. Okay,
Yeah.
because what is the work that if it's not done by the experts, there will be mistakes. Now, the next thing is to look at what the experts are actually doing, exploit the constraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to see whether they are only doing this expertise. Now, what do you think?
Probably not.
What do you think, right? Probably not. And I
80%
tell
of the time.
you even more. If you promoted them to be managers, for sure not. In other words, a lot of their capacity will be in managing people and administration tasks and all of HR tasks, and not doing the expertise. Now, I'm not saying they should not be promoted. I'm just telling you, you could know up front, if your experts became the managers, it means by definition that a lot of what they're doing is not this expertise. Now, then of course, as a conclusion of this gap between their expertise and what they're doing now, what you need to do is to try and remove as much as possible the non-expert work from the experts, to offload. In our experience, you can get like 30% capacity.
At least.
Right. Now, the next step is the most interesting one. It's also the most difficult one. Remember subordinate?
Mm-hmm.
The most difficult one to do, but it's the breakthrough. In most cases of such environments, the 30% capacity you revealed, which is amazing, it's not sufficient to get out of this loophole. Because the organization is really scaling or you lost a lot of people, it's not sufficient. You really need to build more experts. But how do you do that?
Training, right?
Yeah, but who needs to train?
The experts.
But they don't have time. Right? So, but now you reveal time. Because you expose 30% capacity. Now, we don't say training because this gives the impression of being in a classroom, etc. You need to use the time that you expose for the experts to make sure that they are they are doing the full kit. They make sure that the work for the less experienced people is fully kitted. Which means, what do they mean fully kitted?
So there's the full kit managers.
They are the one that will sit with every less experienced person for every job and say, okay, for this job, this is what you need to make sure, blah, 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 blah. That's full kit at gate 0.
Yeah.
Then they tell them gate 1, which means you reach this step, that's the full kit to move from gate 1, Before you go, you come to me. I want to make sure your kit is full before you proceed to the next stage. This is how, now they have the time. Before they didn't have the time.
That makes sense, yeah.
So you actually, and that's counterintuitive, you should try to make sure that as much as possible of the work of your experts will be to full kit others, not to do the work themselves. As much as you can. They need to do the work themselves only if it's really now you need to do this expertise. Use the expertise to full kit, not to do the work, if you can.
I like that. Yeah.
This will move you out of that vicious cycle. Now, of course, if you reach a real extreme of such, high load of non-standard work, it also will help you to try and standardize it to some extent by maybe asking your salespeople not to sell, dramatically different products every time or orders, but that's a business decision.
Of course.
Okay, that's another application of a theory. We see it today we see it quite common because work is so diversified and customized. So many times your experts become bottlenecks.
Absolutely. So you are working all over, like the world, you have presence anywhere, right?
Correct. We have very big operation in Japan, US, Latin America, Brazil, India. Very big operation.
So we're definitely excited to see you in Florida.
Yes.
What's your expectations?
So we want to do this 2-day workshop where companies will send their teams.
Yeah.
Like the first day of the workshop, I want to already make sure that every team can define very clearly what is the constraint, what they need to do to get more of the constraint, how do they need to align the system to get more of the constraints, how to do it for their plant, how to do it for their project environment. Every manufacturer also have a project environment.
Absolutely, that's so true.
Be the design, the engineering, the customer service, whatever is the the project environment. So what is the most common obstacle to flow? Of course, we teach it during the first day, so
Yeah.
we can relate it.
So you think that they'll be able to actually identify?
The whole point of the workshop is to make it very practical. And we have our experts that will come, TUC experts. And so we teach a certain concept, then you have a breakout to relate it to your company.
That's
And
nice.
you sit with, every group sits with an expert to relate
So
it.
it's not like a session where you're just listening. You're actually doing stuff.
It's a workshop.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the idea, to have this 2-day workshop. Then we take a break, several weeks between the 2 days.
Yeah.
So 1 day, a break, and then another day. And we designed this workshop because we wanted more and more companies to really apply theory of constraints and get results.
Yeah.
And they don't have to go into consultancy and all of that. Have this knowledge and start applying it and get results. And the next time I will be here, and for this 2-hour speech, I will share a lot of what we just discussed and what will be there in the 2 days. So,
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating, you said you really want to spread the knowledge
we
across.
believe in it.
Across the company.
It's not a religion, but we still believe in it.
No, of course, and I'm surprised that.
We see so many managers read the book The Goal
Yeah, that's what I
and like it and remember it, but when we ask them, have you applied it?
They don't implement or don't know how to implement, right?
My father used to laugh when he was in a good mood. He used to say, the goal is like the Bible. Everyone that reads it says it makes perfect sense, but very few practice it.
I like that.
Very few actually practice it.
Because they're in a vicious cycle of firefighting that they have no time to actually practice it.
And you need to break inertia. Inertia is very strong.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So, hope we have fun and
I think we will. Yeah, I'm looking forward for that.
Absolutely. We're doing it across the nation, so whenever we're doing it, we see a lot of traction.
So our goal is really to bring it to Florida, not just Southwest Florida. I mean, we're trying it in Southwest Florida first, since I represent Southwest Florida, but FloridaMakes, we are connected all over Florida, and the intent is to bring it everywhere. So really excited to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. Hope to see everybody there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.